Hello, this is Mark Tucker,
Hey, this is Alan Furstenberg,
and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Hey, Alan.
Hey, Mark, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be back. Interesting topic from the previous episode with Michal.
Yeah, no, that was a fun conversation with Michal, and you said you wanted to keep the conversation going, so
Yeah, so I felt like it was a really good overview of what Model Context Protocol. I might just say that because that's easier than making sure I get MCP correctly. Um, but
well, it's also for again people of our generation, we remember MCP from Tron, not necessarily in a good light. So I it's an interesting choice for a name.
Well, and it seems like there's just lots of acronyms that are like do 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 do, and so I thought what we would do is we kind of would take just a little bit of step deeper and look at a little bit of code, look at the actual protocol documentation a bit, and a few other things, and just try to kind of go a little bit deeper. We're not going to jump into the deep end here. We're still in the shallows, but from a developer perspective, definitely the code that we're going to be showing is TypeScript code, but it could be Python or something else. So that's just kind of I thought a good next step for the topic that we just shared on an episode on.
No, I agree. I think it's the logical next progression. But you had two questions for Michal that came up in the conversation, and I wanted to know: do you feel like they got answered?
Somewhat. What problems? What problems do they? Is it supposed to solve? A little bit. We talked about. I did get kind of an interesting perspective when you talked about that. About MCP being something that non-coders kind of have to deal with configuration of in order to get something like Claude Desktop to work. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I kept thinking about like, well, how is this as a developer going to make my life easier or more complex or not, right? Didn't get a great understanding of like what exactly the pain points. I understand that like if there is a protocol and it's called X and lots of things are compatible with X, then it just makes your job easier. That's yeah, I understand that perspective, but I'm not sure exactly how
I
it's going to fit.
I feel like for me, something started clicking so that I could start looking at this instead of looking at this as a protocol, and it is a protocol.
Yeah.
But instead of looking at it as the communication protocol, if I started looking at it as the equivalent of the web page or the equivalent of an app, things started clicking into place a little bit for me.
Okay.
And then all of that kind of fell out the window when I actually started like to try to configure a client to use it. Because
Yeah, and so
we'll get to that.
and you're talking specifically like Claude Desktop, right?
I started using Claude Desktop, right? Or I tried to start using Claude Desktop. Yes.
All right. So just to show, so everybody knows just like how deep this is, I haven't installed Claude Desktop. The little bit that I've done is with something called MCP Inspector. So that's even like Claude Desktop makes calls to an MCP server, and the inspector allows you to make those same calls. And it was working earlier, and then it wasn't. So I may not actually be able to show you, because I think it would clear some things up if we actually got to use the inspector. But if not, then I'll kind of walk you through a little bit of how to get started, and you can kind of discover yourself.
And that kind of goes to the second question that you asked, which was, how do you use this besides Claude Desktop and MCP Inspector? And I don't know what else you've found. I haven't, I find lots of clients out there that are talking about it, but nothing that I was willing to play with.
Yeah, and the thing that was kind of interesting to me and kind of felt more like as a developer, what was interesting was that LangChain had the ability to, so you're
Yes.
writing an agent in code. And maybe we'll, before we jump into this, we'll kind of talk about this concept of what is the application that the user is running? Are people in the future going to say, just like browser wars, I use Chrome, I use Firefox? It's like, well, I use Claude Desktop, well, I use OpenAI XYZ. Is that going to be how we interact? Like that we pick an LLM maker and
Well, I don't
and
know that
and
we'll
we
pick
and
it.
we use that LLM, or is there going to be something more generic, but it's still like an LLM? You have some tool where you do your chat interface or your talk interface, and you can choose which LLM, because these tool things, this MCP is like independent of the LLM that you're
Right.
using.
I I was watching a podcast of a fellow GDE, and they were talking about MCP as well. This is obviously a hot topic, and they were coming at it from a web developer's point of view and an SEO point of view, and they were very much saying these clients are the new browsers, and MCPs are the new websites.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting take. I don't disagree with it. I'm not sure how much I agree with it, but I don't disagree with it.
Yeah.
Um, but it was an interesting perspective, and yeah, I think these clients are going to be the way that we interface with it. I would phrase that as these agents are the way that we're going to interface with it. These conversational agents are the way that we're. You see
Yeah.
where I'm going here, where
Yeah.
where our thinking is, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that the LLM is not necessarily going to be a fixed part of the agent either. Increasingly, we're seeing clients that are letting you choose the LLM to do the work. So, you could select Claude, or you can select Gemini, or you can select GPT, and you'll have the same front end, you'll have the same conversational interface, but a different LLM. And now, in addition to that, you're going to have a different, set of tools available through MCP.
And so everybody's going to have their own flavor of browser, their preference, their favorite. Um, or I also see the situation where developers build applications that users use, and they have AI, and they use AI, but it's not like a general purpose AI. It's a very specific AI for the application or the situation that they're using. Like I guess in one case, like and right now today with MCP is like if you've got Claude Desktop, there's some configuration that has to happen to know where the MCP servers are.
Yes.
But if you were writing an application that in essence exposed either a voice or a chat interface to it, you could select and hide behind the scenes whatever LLM or LLMs you wanted for this different scenarios, and you could host inside the app the client, the MCP client that calls the MCP server to get the tools that it needs to call. So, and maybe both of those are options, but it's just kind of interesting to think about. It's kind of like one, at least right now, MCP is exposed. The user has to know that MCP exists. Whereas if it's an app that's embedding MCP in it, then the user of the app doesn't know at all. And there is no configuration that they have to do.
That's true. And this is one of my biggest problems right now with something like Claude Desktop is that there's a lot that you need to type in to configure a server for Claude Desktop.
Right.
And you have to type it in. There's no automatic configuration. It's literally everyone is giving instructions about here's the JSON that you need to type into Claude. It's really, really messy right now.
Yeah.
I mean, messy to the point where I'm amazed this has gotten the adoption that it does.
Yeah. I think part of that messiness, part of that configuration is in some cases, the tools have to run local. And I remember that diagram that you showed in the last episode that
Right.
was that was talking about the MCP servers are actually running on the local computer. And and looking through the documentation, there is this concept of a local server versus a remote server. Right now, at least how I understand it, is that the local server means that the tools are running locally, which I think would be important, like if you needed to have access to your computer's file system,
Right.
or to the example they had to the instance of Blender that's running on your computer, or
Right.
other things. I could understand why that might need to be a local, tools running locally and have to, be, somehow configured or whatnot.
Right. I feel like though what's the right way to put this? It really does feel like they're pushing the notion that things should be local. That's like the way they're encouraging it.
Yeah.
Because that's what most of their examples are about. That's what most of the servers look like. They're kind of saying, yeah, there's this remote option, but you want it to be local. That's really the way it should run. And that just, I don't know. I'm still trying to get used to this notion.
Yeah, and that's harder as an app developer who wants to embed MCP like or an AI inside of their application, because now you have to somehow figure out how to run code locally.
Right.
And then if you're going to do that, then why not just embed the tools that your app needs? Because then you don't have, if you've got some
Right.
ad tool and it's in a MCP server. I'm going to totally do this wrong through the whole thing, but if they have a function that adds two numbers together, it's called add with its description, and it's listed in a server that has 10 tools in it, and you need some other tool other than add, and you're hosting a server yourself that has an add function, then how do you avoid collisions between like-minded tools if you've got more than one server?
Well, and this was something Michal kind of started talking about, was where he was saying things like this is why he saw it more as a plugin for a browser,
Yeah.
and also why this leads to DLL hell.
Yeah.
So it was certainly as I started looking at code, it was very obvious to me the dangerous path we were heading down here.
So this was all kind of talking about local servers. Well, what about remote servers? Because what if the thing that you need to call is really in the end an API, and your tool wraps an API call, uses fetch or something to make a call to some service that's hosted in the cloud. Now, that doesn't have to run local. So do you have to then have the tool run local and the local code calls fetch to then call remote to get to the API call? Do you really need that code running local? Can you run that service directly, that remote service directly? And we're going to jump into some code and kind of like look at, well, what does that mean if you're creating a local server versus a remote server?
Right. Now, I mean, certainly the images that I saw, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this, it certainly looked like there was still needed to be a local server component, even when you were doing network integration.
I am wondering about that. So let's look about a little bit of code, and we
Okay.
might end up with more questions than we have answers at this point, which I
Okay.
think is okay. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to jump into the documentation for the model context protocol
Okay.
itself. So going here to the browser, there's a section in the documentation. In this case, it's under the TypeScript SDK. Here, I guess I'll give a little bit more of a. So here's the actual repo. There is a model context protocol.io website, but looking through here, it talks about running your server, and it talks about standard IO and streamable HTTP. So through this library that helps you create an MCP server, then you import MCP server, which that server is the same whether it's local or remote. And then you also import a transport layer. So the first one we're going to talk about is standard IO, which is, this is very much a local server. And the code's, there's not a lot of code there. You create a basic MCP server object, you give it a name, you give it a version,
Yep.
and then you register some tools and you create a transport and you connect the server to the transport.
Now, okay, hang on a second.
Yep.
Are we looking at client code or are we looking at server code here?
This is the server code. This is the code for creating, well, this is the code for creating an MCP server. Now, where does that MCP server actually run? That's a question. But if it's standard IO, it's definitely running local.
I guess that okay. I mean, that wasn't my question, to be honest.
Okay.
Because I'm sort of getting used to that. It's more, I guess it's more what is running this and how does it get? Okay, keep going. I guess what it is I'm looking at this code and it says server is the new MCP server, connect transport. I'm like, wait a minute, what is that?
So the way the client is going to talk to this, the MCP client library is going to talk to this MCP server library.
Is over the standard IO transport.
Is over
okay.
standard IO.
Okay.
All right. And it doesn't, there's another place that shows you, and I'll walk through a little bit of code that I've got that will help with this a little bit. But you talked about last time that you can register tools, which are the kind of the main thing, or you can register resources or prompts. There's things that you can register by name. In the case of tools, you have a schema as far as what arguments there are, which are the, what's data type are they required or not. The LLM then uses that description and then it calls a tool. So actually what the MCP server does behind the scenes has a number of different, I'm going to call them endpoints for lack of a better term, because normally you think of endpoints as something that's a service, but if you were to connect to the MCP server through the inspector, you would get a call to say, what's the configuration? And then it comes back and it will tell you, oh, you're running this server and this version and some config information. And then the client can say, hey, MCP server, give me a list of all the tools that you support. And then it will come back and give you a list. Now, my understanding then is that call would be what LLMs are using to know what tools are available to call.
Right.
And once an LLM says, hey, I'm going to choose tool A, then there is a call to say tool/call to actually call to have that code executed. And then that call is intercepted and actually then code runs. That's how you create, register things with, and connect a server to a transport to make it available. I'm going to skip the session version of the Streamable HTTP because I want it to be a little bit simpler, but there's a session management without. Now, if this is once again server code, right? Because we're going to have a call to get a server, and instead of the standard IO transport, we're using this streamable HTTP server transport. So now the client is going to talk to the service via HTTP as opposed to standard IO, which seems to make more sense. In like you're saying, hey, I'm hosting my server separate from my client code, so my client is going to call out remotely to this server and get the list of tools available. And then that client is going to call out to the LLM, say, hey, these are the tools that are available. And then the LLM's like, hey, you call this tool, and it's going to say, hey, MCP server, execute this tool and give me back the response, right? That's where it seems to make more sense to me. And this code seems to support that, because in one of the node servers that for creating websites or HTTP servers is Express.js. So here we're creating an Express.js app. We're saying we're going to use JSON. we're going to expose a post endpoint called MCP that's going to take a request or a response, and then it's going to create a server. And they're saying that they're going to create the server over and over again for every call when it's stateless, so that there aren't any collisions.
And that's pretty
So
normal.
yeah, so every time a post call hits this endpoint, and that's going to be a post call that could also have list tools or call tool or other things like that. It's going to, and I think the server then handles those special types of endpoints or calls, but then it just, it handles the request through this handle request call here.
Uh-huh.
It gives some errors. And then these other two down here for a get or delete call is just saying, hey, we're going to give a 4 or 5 error, the only endpoint that's available on this server. So don't try to do a denial of service attack by calling my get endpoint. There's no get endpoint.
Okay, that seems unnecessary to specify, but sure, okay.
So that's kind of the example of how to host it locally, which was the diagram that we saw in the last episode, where the tools run locally, but it seems like there's a way for the tools to run externally. Now, it doesn't make sense to have something that would access the file system on the server that's running the service, because that's not really what you want when you say I want to access the file system. You want to access your local one. So
well, I
depends
feel
on
like
your tools.
I feel like the important bit here, and I'm still trying. There's so much that I feel like I don't know where this is documented. The fact that this is a streamed response is kind of telling me that the other one is non-streamed, that it's request response only. That what we're seeing here, since this is streamable, it's handling things a little bit differently. And it's meant to work with a remote streaming system as well. What I feel like is kind of confusing to me is when I set things up in Claude Desktop, what I'm configuring it with is where to run a program.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm literally giving it a path to a program to run. It's not that I have a problem with that, but I feel like the best way I have to express this is it feels a lot like what in the earliest days of web CGI programming. Do you remember CGI?
Oh my gosh, it's been so long. So
Right.
I don't remember any of the details. I do remember that was, yeah.
I mean, I don't remember much of the details. I don't remember what CGI stands for even, except it was also a badly chosen acronym. What I do remember, though, is essentially the way that it worked is every time a request came into the web server, it would literally run a program, send the input from the user through standard input, and take the standard out. The program was expected to generate HTML as output, which the server would just send back to the client. This feels a lot like that.
Interesting, yeah. Well,
And
let's dig in a little bit different, a little bit more by looking at some code.
okay, let's look at some
Okay.
code. Show me the code.
Show you the code. Okay. So if we jump into here, this is just a very bare bones MCP server. So there's a TypeScript file under source. If you build the code, then it actually converts it to JavaScript and puts it under a build folder. Now, if in order for me to how I'd run this inspector is that in one window I would do npm start, which is really just calling node and this file that's in build folder index.js. And we'll look at that code in just a minute, but just wanted to show you, you would start the code in essence, so that starts the server running. And the server that we're starting is a standard IO local server. And then in order to get the inspector, you open up another window and you can just npx this model protocol inspector, but give it a same path. I'm going to do node to the build folder to index.js. Now what that does is runs, and now you've got a local server that's running. The code for this is just, like I showed kind of in that beginning example, we're importing MCP server code. We've got the standard IO protocol. Zod helps us with type definitions, like schema definitions of what the object's going to look like.
That's how we define the tool. Yep. Okay.
Define the tool. So like we've had in the example before, we created a new server, gave it a name, gave it a version number. And then you can start adding things. So I'm registering a tool called add that takes in two parameters. One is A, and it's a number, and B, which is a number. And then it has a handler that gets called when the add tool is called, and it takes the value of A and the value of B and adds them together and then converts it to a string and then returns that as content of type text. So that is how you define a tool. It's not that much different than how you would define a tool if you were using LangChain. You have the
Right.
same basic components. You've got
Yeah.
some, and the fact that we're registering the tool and we're defining what this right here defines what the schema is. That's how when the server tells you like, give me a list of tools, it can go through for every tool registration and say, oh, you have an add, and an add looks like this, and this is the schema for it. And then later, when the server is asked to execute this tool or calls this tool, then it's going to call the handler on this code, passing A and B, and then getting back a response and returning it. So everything that needs to happen with the registration of this tool happens just in this code here. And you can have multiple tool registrations in the same server. Any questions about this part
Nope.
right here?
This is all making sense to me so far.
Okay, so this example that I grabbed also had this thing called a resource template, where once you give it a name, in this case greeting, and this is like in a URL format, and I'm not sure exactly why it's that way. It's saying, hey, I'm accepting a name, and so when you register the handler for it, you say, I'm getting some URI, and so this actually comes in as the URI, and this is the name. So it's like if I said Mark, I passed in here, then the contents is going to say, oh, I'm going to return back the contents, and the text is going to say, hello, Mark. So this is a way that if you wanted to define some templates, that reusable output templates that the LLM or your application is going to use, probably your application. I don't know why the LLMs would care about this. Here under main.
And resources, and to be clear, resources
Yeah.
are one of the elemental types for the MCP protocol. They're meant to be things, like,
Yeah.
I think the way they describe them are file contents or,
Yeah.
screenshots and log files and live system data, whatever. So it's just data that's available using a generic URL format.
So like if I've got some sort of API call that gives me a list of actors, right? If it's like IMDb or something like that, then I'm a little uncertain if I should define that as a resource because it's only a get. There is no side effects to it. It's not doing anything. But whereas a tool is actually doing something, in this case, it's just adding two numbers together. I think, like in Claude Desktop, tools require users to say, go ahead and use this tool. I'm not so sure that resources require that same sort of user intervention to approve.
The impression I get, and I'm still,
Yep.
is that this is really meant for clients only. It's not meant to be passed along to LLMs. So it may be meant for things like, user static information that the client needs to know about the user, but that isn't stored in a tool and that the LLM wouldn't be querying for. It might be information that's passed along to the LLM as static information. Or it might be an image that's displayed as part of a logo.
Yeah. It's a little confusing with the example that they have in this case. The third class of things that you can register with the server are prompts, which sound very much like this is stuff you're going to pass to the LLM, and it's got a role like, is this the user? Who is this prompt about? So those are the three different types. But if we come down here to the main part, we're starting the server transport. We're connecting our server to this transport, and we should, if we were to run this, we would get a message saying the MCP server is running on standard IO. And then with that running, we could come over here to this other one and run this inspector, and the inspector would know where this code was so it could run it locally. So I'm going to switch over now to the non-running MCP Inspector, but just show you that there are two different options here. So one is standard I/O, and the other one is SSE, server-side events, right? Which I think is the remote call. So if it was this, then it's got a command and it's got an arguments, and what would happen is that you would click connect, and in this history you would see like an initialization call. And you could see that it connected to the server and that the name of the server and the version number would come back, as well as flags that, yes, I support tools. Yes, I support resources. In this case, because that's the two things we have, and it didn't come back with anything that would say about a prompt. Now you've got this connected, and this top part, I'm sorry, this is just really bad that it's not showing. This top part would give you, say, like tools, and you could click on a button that says list the tools. And then you could see a list of tools. You could click on the tool, and over here in this panel over here, you would see add A and B, and you get to fill that in, click enter, and do that. So when you say list the tools, in history there would be an entry that says list tools list or list tools. When you actually executed the tool, there would be a tool call, and you could see what the request was and what the response was. So this is very much, in essence, it seems like it's a server in the fact that it's taking in requests and it's coming back responses, and maybe that's why they chose to call it a server. But it seems like in some cases the server is running local, in other cases it could be running remote.
So speaking of running remote, if we change the transport type to SSE, what changes?
You get a URL, you get the ability to authenticate with some sort of bearer token.
Interesting, okay.
And I haven't run this against I don't have a remote server running, so I don't know exactly what it would take. But I'm assuming when I connected to it, it would still get the same init.
Yeah.
When I said list tools. So the client library for MCP client has functions for like list tools or call tool or things like that. So it's still helpful to think that there is a client and there is a server, but I think I'm at least leaning towards that when it says local, it means that the tools are running local to the machine. And when it says remote, that the tools are running wherever this MCP server is hosted.
Oh, yeah.
So now the next part I want to show you is a little bit more interesting. So one of these servers that I've seen, a sample one is from a person I know here in the Phoenix area, Arizona for a long time, Dan Wallin. And he's created one for Marvel. So it gives you, connects to the Marvel, some API for Marvel. Now, one of the things that I ran across in here, and I was like, well, what is this? There is this something called a Smithery YAML file. And I'm like, what is Smithery? So last episode, we talked about a registry. If you go to Smithery.ai, you can see that this is listing model context protocol servers. There's over 5,000 of them, and they're grouped. And if you look at down here, it says this one's remote, this one's local, this one's remote, and they're different categories. So there kind of is a registry, or at least the beginnings of an idea of a registry.
I started poking at this, and in a way, it's a registry. In another way, I'm still not sure what it really is, because my case that I always search for is Google Drive to see what MCP servers come up for searching Google Drive. Not least of which because Anthropic provided a sample server. So there are lots of people building off that sample server.
Yeah.
Some of them identified as local and some of them identified as remote. And even in cases where it was listed as remote, you still needed to specify things locally, which was confusing to me.
No, is this specifically Claude Desktop?
And this is part of the problem is, this was in the instructions for whatever tool it was that I was looking at. So I was looking at something that was called Google Drive Server,
Mm-hmm.
and it gave an overview which had what tools were available. And when I looked at the API, it says, you'll need your Smithery API key. Okay. But then it's also talking about how the configuration requires a client ID and a client secret and a refresh token. And I'm like, well, why? I don't get it.
Yeah.
This goes back to the conversation that Michal and I had about authentication and authorization. Is this still feels like a mess? I still need to specify this somewhere, and it's not clear where.
Yeah, and I am unclear as well. It seems like that these things are being hosted on Smithery. So then are the MCP servers,
Running on Smithery?
yeah, can you host a local MCP server on Smithery, and does it do something different
Well, I
as
don't think
opposed to
so.
if it's running remote?
I,
So
I, I think if I think the local ones are meant to be downloaded and installed,
maybe
and
maybe
Smith
so.
and Smithery is just acting as a directory service. I
Well,
don't
yeah.
I don't know about the remote ones though. I'm still very confused about that.
Yeah, and so this is the part where the confusion that I have. So like if we were to look up comic and we would see this Marvel MCP, so we could click into this, right? And we could click on this GitHub link and it's going to take us to this same
Right.
link. Yeah, this Marvel MCP link here. There's also a link to a homepage if someplace. But so this is definitely saying that it's remote, and it's saying that it's interact with the Marvel characters and comics, and it gives you a list of tools.
Right. But
And
if you click on API there,
yeah, and that's the part that's the little bit confusing to me, in the fact that here it's saying that you still need to install the but this is like if this is the client, right? So the client code can still connect to using a streamable HTTP protocol to this server.smithery.ai endpoint with the /MCP at the end. So it seems like that this
right.
server is being hosted here.
But then in the config, it talks about what the API URL is.
Yeah, and but is that because you still need to configure like what's the public and private key is, so that when this is
Right.
running on this server, that it knows how to connect to this other API, because this is really just acting as a proxy, right? So you're
Right.
saying,
And
hey,
then
what are the tools? Oh, I got this tool. Run this tool. Okay, this tool is actually an API call. So I need to know what the base URL is. I need to know what the public and private key are, so I can make this call out and get the response back and format it in such a way to return it,
right.
right?
And then it talks about the configuration schema, and I've got no idea, that doesn't look like the configuration schema that Anthropic is looking for.
Yeah. So
So
is this a configuration of your server? So is that server specific? Like what? So there might be something where config is empty because there's nothing that you really need, like that simple add calculator function. Maybe I don't need any config at all for this. But now instead of having, so this is actually like you're creating up a new client and you're saying connect to this client, and see, you can say client list the tools. So now it's going to call out remotely to this HTTP streamable HTTP server and connect. And so then it's going to forward off that list tools call, and however it does over the transport, so that when the server hits it, it says, oh, you want a list of tools? Here's the list of tools. So it is a little bit confusing. And the last part that's a little bit confusing to me is like, this is very much saying, oh, I'm using a streamable protocol, HTTP streamable protocol. But if I were to go back here to this code and I would look at the source of this code, then I look at the index. which is the main file, and it's saying that it's needing a standard I/O server transport. So I don't know if it's just that what's on the server is different from the actual code, or there's another branch or something that's not public
That's a good question.
that
Yeah.
because you're setting a request handler for tool schema, and you're going through and registering your different tools, and then this one's just setting up a standard I/O protocol and starting your server, just like when I was running it locally. So I am a little bit confused why this looks like it's a local server, and
So
even
okay, so hang on. So looking at this code,
yeah.
we set a request handler for the call to where are the tools specified?
So
Oh, there it is.
here's
Okay.
here's the list tool schema, and it's going to go to this Marvel tools. So if you go into this tools folder, then it's saying here are all the tools that are available,
Okay.
right? And so it's iterating through each of these tools and registering each of the different tools. So like here, each of the tools has a a description and the schema, which is actually hosted separately.
Which
I
is
think this
defined in
probably,
it, which
yeah,
for some reason they've decided to define in a different
define
file.
a separate
Okay.
file. Yeah. So this is the same thing that we're used to. So here's a description and a schema, and like this is a value. So I'm just assuming this is going to turn into the name of the tool and the description and the schema and the handler. So the stuff that we've seen before.
Right.
It's just a little bit different format. But if you look back at it looks like maybe it's a different, instead of like registering a tool, it's saying these are all the list tool schemas, and here's all the call tool schemas.
Okay.
So it's, I think it's just a different way of registering it. But when the request comes in, it's going to check to see if the name of the tool is in the list of Marvel tools. And if it is, then it's going to go ahead and call it. So it's just a different way. Instead of hard coding right here, they've kind of very much looks like that this is local. And even if you look at the Smithery YAML file here, it's talking about the start command is standard IO. But so I'm a little bit lost at this point.
I'm not quite sure why there's this. Yeah.
Of like, why would this be registered as remote? Is there just a mismatch in what's in this registry versus the source code for it? But like we also look at like talking about hosting MCPs versus local MCPs. So I don't know, I haven't got into this enough to totally wrap my head around what's going on here. Because the last part, like you had said before, if you had gone to this directory and picked something that said that it was local, right?
Desktop Commander is a great example of something that's local.
Yeah, so if I go in here, it's still talking about it being streamable HTTP and still saying that this is the server, but the server URL is being passed to this streamable HTTP client, which is, I don't know, seems obvious to me that this is part of the model context protocol. It's not something that's Smithery specific.
Something's something's not making sense here. What does the configuration schema for this one look like?
There is an empty configuration.
Scroll down.
So there's this configuration and there's this configuration. I don't know if they're the same.
Okay, so it is empty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this case, you just call tools. You don't need to pass anything or configure the server at all before you make any calls. So it's So I'm a little confused, and it seems like it's almost there, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
It's good to get into this code. It's good to start diving in. I feel like this is just raising more questions for me.
I know, and I did feel like that we were going to end this with more questions than we had answers.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm going, well, this is all really cool, but how do I do this for Claude Desktop? I don't know. I don't know where this leaves me. And I
Yeah,
feel like that's what's frustrating for me about this whole thing is, you know, I don't know.
yeah. Well, like I say, is it possible that Claude Desktop only it supports local MCP servers?
I have no idea.
I
I
don't
truly
know.
don't. Maybe, but they're the ones that defined the protocol.
So that
So
you think that they would have an example of how to do both, right?
right.
The inspector does both. So yeah, I am confused still
So
on some of it.
I think I feel like I need to play. I feel like both of us need to play more with this.
Well, yeah, and the thing is I feel like I'm just like 30 minutes or 3 hours away from
Right.
like having that like, oh,
That
okay.
eureka moment.
Yeah, exactly.
That somewhere there's that eureka moment, but I don't know where. And and part of this, part of my frustration is coming out of my conversation with Michal. I'm like, oh, I get it. This is just going to be the equivalent of apps, and yeah, we're still in a bit of a rough time where we always need to compile our apps. We can't just install binaries, and we'll get to that. But I feel like we're further away from this than we were ever. One of the things that feels like it frustrates me a little bit is Anthropic has been billing this as the USB-C for.
That doesn't make any that's like it's like they might as well said it's the sliced bread
Well,
of
I mean, I
because I
get it.
don't
I get the analogy. They're basically saying, an MCP server is, you just plug it in. I feel like it's not, USB-C. I feel like this is more like 9-pin serial port. We've got a standard. Most people are more or less following it. It's a little bit of an improvement from the 25-pin serial port,
yeah.
but there's still a lot that you need to do manually to connect a device. You need to get the baud rate right. You need to get, are we, 7 or 8 bits, and is there a parity bit?
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of configuration for your serial port you need to do here. Maybe eventually we'll get to USB-A, where, I plug it in and it doesn't work, and I plug it in and it still doesn't work, and then I plug it in again and it works. But we're not there.
Yeah. Well, and so having more of these questions, and you're like, well, okay. Well, part of this was exciting to me. Is like, well, finally, this is just code that's like I'm hosting something, and it's like I don't have to understand how the LLM is built, or even
Yes.
I'm just like, finally, this is something in AI where I can take something, I can wrap it in an MCP server, and I can use it for myself or make it available for other people. And I've got a place where I can have a strong foothold and go from there. Is kind of how I've like finally. But then I just had a lot of questions. And then when you got to the part of conversation in the last episode about, well, isn't it just going to be agent that does this and another agent that does this? And I'm like, yeah, very well, maybe.
Yeah. So this has been a conversation, and we're going to pick this up again, I am sure. But if there is somebody out there that can start answering these questions, man, we would love to talk to you. We'd love to have you on the show, because Mark, we're going to be talking about this some more on Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Mark. This has been a great next step, and I can't wait to take the next one too.
All right, take care.
You too.